Well, hi, everybody. Guess we'll start right on at 6 o'clock here. Thanks for coming out tonight. Really appreciate it. My name is Chris Gruba. I'm one of the senior planners with the Berkshire Regional Planning Commission. And for those that might not know, we've been helping out the towns and cities in Berkshire County with the new marijuana bylaws, or marijuana laws, rather, for the state, and kind of doing any assistance with the towns and cities, whether they would like to make a bylaw or do a moratorium, or maybe neither. So tonight we have two guest speakers, one being Miss Kay Doyle, one of the commissioners with the Cannabis Control Commission. So she's out here tonight. And we also have Mr. Ray Miaris, a partner at Miaris in Harrington. And Ms. Doyle will be kind of giving a general overview about the law, and then Mr. Miaris is going to follow up with host community agreements and kind of follow up, or kind of get into in depth on how these host community agreements are written and the ins and outs of them. So we were hoping that with Ms. Doyle would give a presentation first. We do a few questions, and then we transition to Mr. Miaris, and then kind of keep all the questions at the end. So, we'll get a couple questions in between, but if we can kind of just, cruise through the two presentations and then do the questions at the end, hopefully we can kind of do it that way. And when the question is asked, if the speakers wouldn't mind to repeat the question so that we can get it here. It's being recorded tonight, and it'll be clear for everybody watching at home or later on. So without any more, we'll welcome Ms. Kay Doyle from the Cannabis Control Commission. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and I want to announce that it's a special tonight. You get not just one commissioner from the Cannabis Control Commission, but you get two, and I'm throwing in a former senator as well, because we also have with us here tonight Commissioner Jen Flanagan, who is former Senator Jen Flanagan. And, just for added measure, I've dragged along our Director of Government Affairs, David Lakeman, who is a former representative of the Mass Municipal Association. So we have, in addition to the municipal attorneys, former municipal attorney in the room, we also have a lot of government expertise up here. So hopefully we'll be able to answer most of your questions tonight, and if there's one we can't answer, we'll certainly go back to Boston and see if we can get back to you afterwards with further information. So I'll run through some of the regulations that we just passed in March and give you a lay of the land. Here is the schedule that we were on, just to give you an idea. We've only been, Commissioner Flanagan and I, on the job since September 11th, literally, and we have managed to get final regulations approved and started accepting applications and approving some applications for priority status. And, I think there is something on here that's going to make this move, so I'm going to have to just do something really quickly. Take a moment to chat amongst yourselves while I fix a possible technical glitch. The timings are still on it. I don't know, it's not your fault. It's one of these things, for some reason, it happens. I will click that. There we go. And we'll get that up and running. There we go. Okay. Those funny things that happens every time I do this slideshow. It's probably trying to tell me to hurry up and not talk too much. So marijuana cultivator. We'll talk about the types of marijuana establishment licenses that are going to be available. So marijuana cultivator is exactly what it sounds like. It's someone who's going to be able to grow the plants and then sell them to other marijuana establishments. Marijuana establishments is an umbrella term. It's what an adult use facility is called, no matter what kind of license type it is a marijuana establishment. Now, marijuana cultivator itself has a little subgroup called craft marijuana cooperative. A craft marijuana cooperative is a scheme designed specifically in response to feedback that the legislature received from farmers that they felt shut out of the medical marijuana industry, and they wanted an opportunity to participate. So So craft marijuana cooperatives were designed to require that members be Massachusetts residents. There's a limited type of corporate structure that they can have. They're authorized to grow and manufacture and package, which is a little different from a marijuana cultivator generally, because marijuana cultivators can't do the manufacturing part of it. They can only do the growing and processing part of it, so the drying out of the leaves, et cetera, and preparing it for market. One of the cooperative members has to have filed a Schedule F farm income tax form within the last 5 years, and that's to make sure we actually get real farmers involved in this. And the cooperative itself has to abide by 7 principles, which is set by the International Cooperative Alliance, and that is to make sure that we don't have any sort of fake cooperatives. They actually have to be operated as cooperatives. And they can only have 1 license for the cooperative. Most other license class types can have 3 separate licenses. Cooperatives can only have 1 because they get a lot with that license. They get the ability to grow, they get the ability to do product manufacturing, and they have unlimited locations up to a certain amount of canopy. Which brings us to what canopy is. So canopy is essentially your mature growing space. And there are different tiers allowed, again, to sort of give all sorts of kind of market entrants an opportunity to participate under our strict guidelines. And the applicants can select what tier they want to be in unless they go for a license type that requires a certain tier. So the limit, the upper limit is 100,000 square feet, which can be divided amongst 3 different locations for a marijuana cultivator, or no location limit for the cooperative. They can have 100,000 square feet around the state, but it may be very small farms that are only devoting part of their farm space to marijuana. The next thing to know about the canopy issue is something called expansion and relegation. So one of the things that you may have seen about marijuana industries out west is that there's been a problem with overproduction. There's too much marijuana being grown, and we want to try and manage that. We want to make sure you don't get that same overproduction in Massachusetts. So once someone picks a tier, they're going to have to be able to demonstrate when it comes time to renewing their license that they are actually able to sell that marijuana and they don't have marijuana sitting in their storeroom not getting sold. If they do have that problem and they are unable to sell 70% of their product, we're going to ask them to step down a tier until they can show that they are able to consistently sell 85% of their product at the top of their tier, and then they can move back up again. A marijuana product manufacturer, again, is exactly what it sounds like. It takes the leaf and it turns it into something else, like an edible, a lotion, an oil, a salve, something like that. They can sell their products to other marijuana establishments, but not directly to consumers. A marijuana retailer is someone who sells marijuana directly to consumers. They buy it from cultivators, they buy it from product manufacturers, and they sell it at stores. I've included a picture of stores around Massachusetts. This particular one is a medical marijuana store in Cambridge. And we also have on the left a medical marijuana store in Northampton, and the same company store in Brookline. And this is another one in Lowell. So these places will only be able to be accessible to people who are 21 years of age or older, and if they're co-located with a medical marijuana dispensary, patients who have a registered marijuana dispensary card will be able to access the store. Another license type that you'll see is a marijuana research facility, because we are Massachusetts, we are leaders in academic and scientific research, and there isn't a lot of research able to be done due to federal constraints around the country. We want to be a leader in marijuana research and do it here. So We are setting up a marijuana research facility license so that people can get that research done and get information out regarding marijuana. Independent testing laboratories are a type of marijuana establishment license, but they have to be separated out from other kinds of marijuana establishments. They have to be independent without common ownership. And what they do is test the marijuana and the marijuana products that are being sold according to strict protocols that were established by the Department of Public Health. And there's also going to be a standards testing laboratory, essentially to provide an opportunity to double check the testing that's being done by the independent testing laboratory. So literally checking the checkers. Marijuana transporters is a license class set up specifically in response again to feedback from farmers who advised us that they would like to grow the plant, but that's just about it. They don't want to be involved necessarily in all aspects of the industry, including very rigid, safe, secure transportation protocols. So what they would prefer to do is contract with a company that has a transportation fleet for them to utilize. So we have third-party transporters, and that's someone who doesn't hold any other kind of marijuana establishment license. It's just someone who transports. Or an existing licensee transporter. So maybe some of the larger marijuana establishments would like to do a side business of transporting goods because they have the capital to get a transportation fleet going. They want to make a little more money by transporting for other marijuana businesses, and we provide them the opportunity to do that. A marijuana micro business is exactly what it sounds like. It's a teeny tiny marijuana company. It's a co-located, well, it doesn't have to be co-located, but it can be a co-located tier 1, which is up to 5,000 square feet. Marijuana cultivator, you can also be a marijuana product manufacturer, or they can choose to do one or the other. The marijuana product manufacturer is limited to buying 2,000 pounds of marijuana to turn into products per year. So it has to stay small if you want to be a marijuana micro business. They do have to be able to demonstrate Massachusetts residency. This is supposed to be a stimulating small business enterprise, and they have a reduced license fee, 50% of the combined sum of what the license fee would otherwise be for the activity proposed. So here's some timelines. On April 1st, we started reviewing applications for priority applicants, which are split into two groups. Priority applicants are existing registered marijuana dispensaries with either provisional certificate of registration or final certificate of registration, or economic empowerment applicants, which we'll get to on another slide, but it's essentially people who have to meet certain criteria. And from April 1st to April 15th, we accepted priority certification applications, and we have now started approving certification applications. What that does for them is essentially gives them a fast pass to the front of the line as we consider applications going forward. So a priority certified applicant will move to the head of the line when we're looking at applications. On May 1st, we will open to everybody applications for cultivation, micro businesses, craft cooperatives, independent testing labs, and transporters. And on June 1st, we'll open applications for retail and product manufacturers. And this is the licensing package. So it consists of 3 separate packets, not including a payment packet. And you can, as an applicant, file them in any particular order, but you have to complete all 3 before you are considered to have completed your application. So one packet is the application of intent, and you have to show that you're incorporated properly, demonstrate compliance with our capital requirements, demonstrate that you have a bond, and the bond is essentially to help municipalities in the event that marijuana needs to be destroyed. We don't want to land our police departments with the expense of destroying it. So we want to have that bond ready for them to use if they need it. They have to show property interest. They have to show that they have sufficient municipal information, which is going to be demonstrating that they have done a community outreach meeting with the host community that they want to do, and also a certification that they have a host community agreement in place. And that certification will need to be done both by the applicant and the municipality. And they also have to explain how they're going to have a positive impact on disproportionately impacted communities. We'll get to that in a second. Second package is background check. It's exactly what it sounds like. The leadership of the applicant has to have their background check done. There's a fingerprint check aspect to it, and it's a nationwide civil and criminal check. There's a great deal of information about what is background checked in our regulations. If you want to get a detailed look at it, just go to our regulations and go to the very end. There's a bunch of very comprehensive charts that will help inform you about the kind of background checks that are being done. Then there is the management and operations profile. That's demonstrating that you're in good standing with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and that you have a business plan, operating policies and procedures, and a training plan that is going to comply with our regulations, which are quite comprehensive. So once that packet is complete, in our view, we notify the municipality that the packet has been completed and give them 60 days to tell us whether or not the applicant is compliant with local zoning bylaws or ordinances. So one of the issues that has come up, and I'm just going to go through a couple of hot button issues real quick because these are usually the questions we get, so I'm trying to head them off, hopefully give you the answers right up front, is there's a provision of the law itself that says the municipality is prevented from converting, municipality is prevented from preventing the conversion of a registered marijuana dispensary to an adult use marijuana establishment. And there were a lot of questions that came up about what conversion meant. Does conversion mean replacing one thing entirely? So we are, getting rid of medical and replacing it entirely with adult, and that's what the municipalities are prevented from doing. It didn't really make sense to interpret it that way because most of the businesses don't intend to replace it entirely. They intend to add onto it. So we are interpreting conversion to be not only the replacing of medical with adult, but the adding on of adult use business to an existing medical business. And there is legislation pending in the legislature to clarify that interpretation. We'll see what happens with that legislation. As you know, it can change. But essentially, and apologies to land use officials here because I shouldn't be using the word grandfather, but I'm going to anyway. A registered marijuana dispensary that has a PCR or an FCR, provisional certificate of registration or a final certificate of registration, no later than July 1st, 2017, will be grandfathered from zoning bylaws or ordinances that would prevent it from conducting the same type of activities it's doing in that town on the adult side. So if you have a cultivation facility fully permitted in town and has a PCR or an FCR, you can't prevent it through zoning from adding adult use cultivation. Another question we had was, does that preventing language mean that you can't pass a moratorium? In our opinion, a moratorium is a planning tool that allows municipalities to figure out how they are going to plan for a specific use. It does not prevent anything on a permanent basis. It is simply a temporary delay. So we voted that we were going to honor moratoria of a reasonable length, and we're going to interpret reasonable length consistently with the Attorney General's office. Having said that, I'm going to say that 2018 is your year. Let's get it done in 2018. When the moratoria expire, we do obviously need to see some zoning bylaws or ordinances that address adult use of marijuana and address it in a way that's compliant with the statute. So we also got questions about whether or not municipalities would be able to require additional local permits if a registered marijuana dispensary was adding adult use to its program. And yes, I mean, it's a different kind of use. It may be a different scale of use. So if the town chooses to require additional special permits, that is reasonable, and we don't deem that to prevent the conversion of a registered marijuana dispensary to an adult use. Now, obviously, you want to be in close touch with your municipal council to make sure that you are doing this in a way that is compliant with the law, but simply requiring an additional local permit is not going to be a problem. So there are provisions in the law that give towns local control to ban marijuana establishments altogether, or to limit the number of marijuana retailers that can be in your town. So you can certainly do either thing, but there are very specific procedures to doing it. So again, I'm going to encourage everybody to be in touch with their town council or city solicitor if you're contemplating doing either thing, because the procedures can be tricky. So this is a quick summary right here that you can ban marijuana. You can ban marijuana establishments, but you can also limit marijuana retailers to 20% of the number of package stores, essentially. And you can limit the number of any type of marijuana establishments fewer than the number of registered marijuana dispensaries registered in the same type of activity in your town. But if you do that, and your town or city voted yes, you're going to have to go, yes on question 4, you're going to have to go through an election procedure. Or if you really take your time to act on this and you end up acting on it after December 31st, 2019, it won't matter if your town or city voted yes or no. Anybody doing these things after December 31st, 2019 is going to have to go through the election process. Again, 2018 is your year. Let's get it done in 2018. And this is basically what it just says. Let's see this slide. So, if your city or town does end up enacting a ban in compliance with the law, we will honor that ban and we won't license the particular type of marijuana establishment that you ban in your town in compliance with your ban. If you instead did a limited number, we are not going to pick for you who gets to be in your town. The town is still going to have to do that local community host agreement and work on who they want to have in their town. If, for example, you have 4 registered marijuana dispensaries in your town and you decide you don't want 4 adult use stores in your town and you limit the number to 2, we aren't going to pick which of the 4 get those 2 adult use licenses. That is something that you are going to need to do because you are more familiar with local conditions, more familiar with what your town needs. Could you hold this question just a little while longer, and then we will answer it hopefully, okay? Buffer zones, this is a very good question.
Can we go back to the other slide?
Sure.
Can we say we only want a cultivator and not a retail store?
So why don't we hold that question for a second, because I just made that gentleman hold his question.
Okay.
And we'll get to that. But yes, the quick answer is you can tailor the kind of ban that you want to do. So buffer zones. It's a different kind of buffer zone than was allowed for medical marijuana, so I just want to flag that for you. It's 500 feet of an existing public or private school, grades 1 through 12. Different language than under medical. Signage, again, very standard stuff, but please note that it says you can't have a standard more restrictive than what is applied to retail establishments selling alcoholic beverages within the municipality. So you may want to look at what your signage bylaws are generally. And then transportation, you can't prohibit a marijuana establishment from transporting through your town. I don't know how you would enforce that anyway, because the vans, honestly, are required to be nondescript. You're not going to see a van driving through your town that says, weed mobile or anything like that. We don't want the marijuana establishment agents getting carjacked because they have valuable payload or a ton of cash in their car. It's, you know, one of the tough things about this industry is that they can't use normal banking processes because of federal restrictions. So a lot of them end up being very cash-heavy operations. We don't want to advertise that there's a van driving through town with thousands of dollars on board because ne'er-do-wells will do bad things. So we want to keep everybody as safe as we can. So in the law, it says you can't ban from transportation, but honestly, I don't know how you'd be able to enforce it even if you tried. So, and my co-presenter is going to speak more to this, but host community agreements are required under the law, and there are limits on how the host community agreements are done and how much you can charge. There's also some public records requirements. I would also encourage everybody to think flexibly about host community agreements, because I know the farming community is already concerned about the upfront expense of participating in the industry, and if the municipality has a very high entry fee in terms of their host community agreement, you know, it's going to create a barrier to entry for the Massachusetts farmers. So don't think of everybody participating in this industry as a large Colorado corporation. Some of them may be your friends and neighbors. And that's basically almost everything that I just said. So I mentioned earlier the different kinds of priority applicants, and again, they fall into the two categories of registered marijuana dispensaries or economic empowerment applicants. I wanted to explain what economic empowerment applicants are. They need to demonstrate 3 of the 6 criteria on this list, and one of the things that I want to talk about particularly is areas of disproportionate impact, because we had a gentleman do a study of the effect of what's known as the drug war, you know, the enforcement of narcotics over the past 30 or so years, and in combination with some economic factors, there are certain municipalities in Massachusetts that have been hit harder than others by economic downturns and then a high rate of arrest for narcotics. All my pretty little effects there. And these are the communities that were determined in the study to be particularly hard hit, and they're not always ones that you would necessarily expect. There are also 4 large communities at the bottom there that are further subdivided because they have particular neighborhoods. They're large cities and have particular neighborhoods that were more hit than others. And those particular neighborhoods are the ones that are going to be eligible, not the entire city at large. There is also a social equity program. So in addition to the possibility of a fast track application, there are going to be certain benefits to qualifying for the social equity program. And the idea here is to get people who may have been impacted by prior activities and get them to come away from the illicit market into the legal market. And instead of being on a corner, being in a store that is regulated, that is taxed, that is supervised, and that is tracked from seed to sale of the product. And I'm going to break from our regularly scheduled broadcasting for a moment to deliver a public service announcement. And I should have announced prior to being a cannabis commissioner, I was Deputy General Counsel at the Department of Public Health. And even though they have taken me out of the Department of Public Health, we can't take the public health out of GAL. So, public health concerns with the illicit market versus the legal market. We all have friends, I'm sure, that have at some point or another participated in the illicit market. If there's one thing you want to do for your friends, it's tell them that when the adult use market gets up and running, stop participating in the illicit market. Not because you're worried about getting arrested or you're worried about getting fined, but because it's better for your health. Marijuana is a sponge. It soaks up contaminants like there is no tomorrow. Lead, mercury, cadmium, pesticides. Farmers, before this all became very illegal in the 30s, used to use marijuana to clear contaminated fields. It's called phytoremediation because marijuana soaks up the contamination from the ground. So it soaks up that contamination, and then it's getting dried up, and you're lighting it on fire and sucking it into your lungs. I mean, there's no point in going and buying organic food from your local vendor if you're then going to suck down a whole bunch of pesticides in your marijuana. It's just not a good idea. And some of these pesticides, some of these contaminants get decreased when you light them on fire, but some of them get much worse, and their carcinogenic effects are amplified. So there's no point in doing all these healthy things in your life and then sucking down marijuana that is hurting your body. Right? PSA over, back to our regularly scheduled broadcasting. Okay. Social equity program. What they're going to get for qualifying for the social equity program is training opportunities in various aspects of running a business, because they may not have ever run a legitimate business, and we want to make sure that we are bringing them out from the illicit market into the legal market, and then making sure they run a legitimate business well, because that's the way to keep them on the legal side of things. And this is just more on that background check packet I mentioned before. And here are a very brief summary of the mandatory disqualifications. If you want to see the full list of disqualifications, again, I encourage you to go to our regulations on our website and go to the charts at the end. It's a much more comprehensive list of what is there. So once you get to the application process, you've been background tested, your community is signed off on you, there are going to be operational requirements. Stringent operational requirements. Your products have to be handled in compliance with the same sanitary requirements that are applied to food. Even though marijuana products are technically not a food for legal reasons, they must be treated like a food for sanitary reasons. Again, because there's no point in making yourself sick with the marijuana. And I had mentioned before the testing protocols. Again, the plant must be tracked from seed to sale in an interoperable database that we have that is being developed right now with our software vendor that will literally, and it's done on the medical side already, track this plant from start to finish, literally from when it starts to when it gets sold out the door. $5,000 bond I mentioned before, in case we need to destroy anything, we don't want to land that expense on the municipality. And then they're required to do everything in compliance with the existing state laws on every other kind of business in terms of cultivation, waste disposal, etc. And they have more stringent energy conservation and environmental requirements than many other kinds of businesses. We are trying to make sure that Massachusetts can comply with an act that requires us to reduce our emissions by 85% from 1990 levels by the year 2050. To be able to do that, because marijuana cultivation can be a bit of an energy pig, we are requiring them to have sustainable practices in terms of energy efficiency. There are security requirements, very stringent security requirements. Marijuana activists say we're treating marijuana like plutonium because the security requirements are so stringent. And in fact, a police chief in Western Massachusetts commented that once the marijuana facility got up and running, it would be the most secure building in town, including the police station. It would be more secure than the police station. And the reason is it has to be alarmed, visitors have to be logged, marijuana has to be in a limited access area that's even more difficult to get to than everything else, and there has to be 24-hour surveillance. One issue I want to flag for you, it has to be sufficiently lit on the outside to allow a readable image to be captured. This can sometimes be challenging in rural towns with dark sky bylaws, so if your town has that, I just want to flag that issue for you. And then the security plan has to be followed with local law enforcement. If the facility decides that something about these security requirements doesn't fit their particular operation, and they ask for it to be swapped out for an alternative security safeguard. That proposed alternative security safeguard is going to be sent to the chief of law enforcement in your community, usually the police chief, and they get a chance to weigh in on whether or not that's a good idea. As I mentioned before, access is going to be strictly limited. There's going to be a requirement that you are 21, so you have to show a government-issued ID to demonstrate that. Or if it is a co-located marijuana dispensary, show your patient ID as well as a government-issued ID. Okay, now this is where I would normally turn over to Commissioner Flanagan, but I saw 2 questions, and I'm guessing just from when they occurred that they may have been municipal-based, so I'm just going to ask for maybe a couple of questions, and then we'll turn it over to Commissioner Flanagan so she can explain marketing and advertising. So the gentleman all the way in the back, yes, that's you.
In the limiting of marijuana establishments, is there a difference between cultivation and a sales establishment or a dispensary?
Yes, the statute only authorizes that, or requires that procedure for the limiting of marijuana retailers. There again is pending legislation potentially changing that, but it still is only pending. So as we stand here today, the procedure pertains to marijuana retailers, just the stores.
So if we were to limit to 20% of what's in our town, we would be limiting not necessarily cultivators, but retail establishments.
Exactly.
Thank you.
And depending on how you worded it, obviously, but, sir.
The state law was changed, I think it was 40A, Section 3, that states that cultivation of marijuana is not agriculture.
Correct.
What is it? And also, how does that apply to land that is in APR or 61A? Does it have to be taken out of 61A?
Oh, so you're the guy who's asking me the hard questions tonight.
That's my job.
That's your job, all right. So, to sum up for everybody else, General Law, Chapter 48, Section 3, Paragraph 1, I got that all right, is the agricultural zoning exemption, which prohibits towns from unreasonably regulating or requiring a special permit for agriculture. When the legislature did that 6-month delay, if you remember, back in December of 2016, they also exempted the cultivation of marijuana from that agricultural zoning exemption. So it is the exception to the exemption. And with regard to the very detailed questions on APR and 61A, I'm going to have to get back to you, because that wasn't my specialty when I was a municipal lawyer, so I don't want to lead you astray. Okay. Maybe our other speaker can help you there, but if not, I will follow up with you afterwards.
Okay.
Or maybe connect you to someone who can answer the question well.
Okay.
Yeah?
Is the municipality allowed to limit just marijuana facility in general to like just one? Just whether it's research, whether it's cultivating, whether it's retail, whatever, just to one marijuana establishment, period.
Well, it's unfortunately a very detailed answer. It will depend on whether or not it was a yes or no community, and how it can be done will depend on whether or not they follow the procedures. Yeah. It was a yes community?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, you probably have to work with town council or your city solicitor, depending on what form of government you have, to figure out whether or not that would fall into the requirement, probably, that you have to go through that whole election process.
No, I figured we had to do that. I just wanted to make sure that we were definitely allowed to do that if we go through the application.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's probably the safer way to go, to do it that way. If you try to do it any other way, it may not stand. I don't know if you're in town, you have to go to the AG's office, and they may say, you know, that it...
We're just so small.
Yeah, no,
I
know, it's a burden on small towns, absolutely.
All the way back. My question was about picking and choosing the types of marijuana establishments you allow in your town. So could you allow a cultivator, grower, and a testing lab and transportation, but not have retail, let's say? because they are also able to create the product.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that the statute does allow you to do is tailor what you want for your particular community, but it may require you to go through that entire election process to be able to do it if you were a yes town, or if you do it after December 31st, 2019. Sir?
Second question. You have everything else on your website. Is this presentation on the website?
No, but our friendly hosts will have it for you.
Thank you.
And they'll be able to email it out. So why don't we take this moment to turn it over to Commissioner Flanagan, and she'll be able to tell you all about advertising, marketing, and a lot of fun stuff.
That I can't. Thank you for having us here today. I do want to say it feels actually kind of nice to be here, considering my first office I shared was with Representative Pignatelli. And Smitty and I had cubicles, so asking about the paper clips I would throw at him from time to time. He wanted to be here tonight. I'm sure many of you know he's out in Boston debating the budget this week, so he couldn't be here, but he's been in contact with our office a lot about the right to farm and the agriculture issues. My job on the commission is the public health side, and I had a lot to do with the advertising and the edibles and the potency levels that we're going to talk about a little bit about today. One of the big things I want to stress is that as we move to adult use, I'm really encouraging people to use the word adult use versus recreational. And from a public health standpoint, we're trying not to attract children and minors to this. And when you talk about recreational things, kids tend to get excited about it, and we really want to make sure that there's less diversion as necessary. And so a lot of what you're going to see here is to prevent that diversion and prevent the attraction. Much of what we have prohibited in the advertising comes from Chapter 55 of the Act of 17. Now, I am in the unique position, having been the only one in the state to vote no on the question, yes on the law, and am now regulating the law. So you can say I flip-flopped, but there were a lot of concerns I had with the question, and I think were addressed in Chapter 55. So when we talk about marketing, advertising, and branding, I won't go through all of them. The point is that we want to allow businesses to be able to market their product, but we want to ensure the fact that we are not attracting this product to children. So they can have a logo, but the logo cannot have medical symbols. It can't use the images of marijuana. It can't reuse any kind of reference to cannabis or marijuana, because we want to make sure that this is a very regulated industry here in Massachusetts. Any kind of sponsorship of a charitable outing or sporting event has to ensure that 85% of the population that is going to be there is under the age of 21. So you're not going to necessarily sponsor Little League in your local cities and towns, but there may be road races where children aren't really going to come, and you don't have the fun run 1 mile before the 5K. We have to have a locked display case inside the establishments. All the marketing has to include please consume responsibly, and then 2 other warnings, which I think we have 4 that we agreed upon during our deliberations back in Boston. All marketing must include the warning developed by DPH. This is also the warnings that are currently being used on the medical side, and we really defer to them because, again, we want this to be very seamless as we transition from just medicinal to adult use. These are the only 2 graphics that you will see with relative to adult use of marijuana. The triangle you see has the marijuana flower. That's our universal symbol. That is the only symbol in Massachusetts that will be allowed to have the marijuana symbol on it. And it is for the purposes of making sure people know that there's THC inside the product that they are about to consume. The octagon shape that says not safe for kids, kids universally know this is kind of the image for stop. We don't want children to be able to get into the packaging. We don't want them to be able to participate in this. And it's really helpful for parents to know if they're at somebody's house and this is on the counter or on the table that there's THC in the product. Again, when I talked about the prohibited practices, and there's quite a few, there's over 17 prohibited practices that we agreed upon, many of which came from the ABCC regulations that we've adopted. So when we hear people say, well, you have to regulate this like alcohol, partly we are doing this with the marketing. You're not allowed to have deceptive, false, misleading, untrue, or misleading marketing, no TV, radio, internet, or electronic communication, billboards, outside advertising, print publication that has at least 85% of the audience, again, is above 21 years old. You'll see that a lot in our regulations. We don't want to have mascots, cartoons, sponsorships, or celebrity endorsements that are attractive to children, and we don't want to have false misleading statements concerning the other licensees. Again, this is a business. People are going to be in competition, but we need to make sure that it's fair. The prohibited practices continue. We are not allowing promotional items. That includes giveaways, coupons, or donated marijuana. You would be shocked that the other states have told us people put these at like the local bake sale where you can raffle them off. You know, a mason jar full of marijuana. We don't want to see that here in Massachusetts. Representations of safety, therapeutic effects other than the labor requirements. We don't want to mislead people that this is going to cure all, that this is again, not medicinal. This is the adult use. When we talk about the facilities, the installation of any neon signage or the illuminated external signage that fails to comply with local ordinances. The local ordinances have a lot of control here. What you have already for your stores is going to continue with this. So my suggestion to some people who are concerned about the fronts of the stores is look at what your ordinances say, because they're going to have to comply with what you've already had in place. The external signage can't be illuminated beyond the period of 30 minutes before sundown until closing. And the use of vehicles equipped with radio or loudspeakers. You often see that in campaigns, where people will drive around with these big loudspeakers saying vote for their candidate or vote against a candidate. We don't want those coming through your town. As Commissioner Doyle said, any kind of vehicle that comes through your town has got to be so discreet, you're never going to even know that they're there. The use of a radio or loudspeaker in the establishment for advertising. We don't want the advertising, marketing, or branding in connection with a charitable, sporting, or similar event, again, unless 85% of the audience is reasonably expected to be over the age of 21. And operation of any website that fails to verify the entrant is at least 21 years of age. We know that kids can try to get into websites. They're very creative. They're very smart when it comes to the internet. We want to make sure that, that someone is saying that they're 21 before they go in there. And the use of unsolicited pop-up advertisements on the internet. We all love the pop-up advertisements. Again, more marketing on public or private vehicles. We're not going to allow these things to be at the MBTA stops, at your local regional transportation stops, on your buses. We also are not going to allow clothing, cups, drink holders, koozies, apparel, electronic equipment, sporting equipment, novelty items, or promotional items. Things that we generally see. Again, we don't want the kids showing up at school on Monday, having a t-shirt, and then walking through the school. We want to make sure that this is for the adults. Question 4 was passed for adult use. We want to continue that. Signs or other printed matter, advertising any type of marijuana product on the interior or exterior of the licensed premise. As you saw in the pictures that Commissioner Doyle showed, these facilities really are very nondescript. I mean, when you go there, there might be the name of the building, the name of the business on the building, but there's not all kinds of pictures and advertisings, and we want to ensure that that remains the same way for adult use. And lastly, we don't want the marketing price of marijuana or marijuana products except the list is on the store and on its website. The display of marijuana or marijuana products has to be clearly visible to a person from the exterior. You know, I often say this, we go to local beaches up in New Hampshire and you walk by and kids as young as 4 can see the accessories in the front window. We don't want that to happen on Main Street. We want to make sure that adults are able to go into this store and they're able to purchase the product they're looking for, but a child walking down the street does not get attracted to some of the accessories and paraphernalia. Any marketing that fails to contain a health warning by DPH, we still want to make sure people understand that this is a substance, that this substance has a altering effect, and that we want to make sure that DPH has that health warning on there. And anything that's improper, just as we would say with any other marketing, you know, you want their marketing to be very appropriate for your town and appropriate for the community. The labeling requirements. There's a number of labeling requirements, which I won't go through all of them, but the conversation that we've had is that to have one of those peel-back labels, almost like you see on Tylenol or over-the-counter medicines, because there's so much information that we want to have on this to allow the consumers to understand what the product is. It would legitimately be much smaller than this if we had to put it on one single label. So we're really trying to consider balancing the information we want you to have versus what could fit on packaging. Considering in a couple slides, we'll talk about how edibles especially cannot be in they have to be single serving packages. And so we want to make sure that if you have a package that's very small, that we don't have a label that you can't read. Again, these are the packaging requirements: opaque, plain design, no neon colors, nothing that resembles existing non-marijuana consumer products. We often think of candy bars or certain cookies or things like that. No design brands or names typically marketed to minors. Again, the theme of this is that it's not attractive to children and to youth. No images of kids, no celebrities that are commonly used, and no words that are often commonly associated with minors. So when we go into additional packaging requirements, anything that has multiple servings must say includes multiple servings. We often talk about the edibles, and each edible is going to be a serving size, but we allow you to have 20 servings in the package, but they have got to be individually scored. So if it's a candy bar, they put on a Hershey bar. Each little piece that says Hershey, that would be one serving size. On the package on the outside, it would say multiple servings. Consumers must be easily perform the division to single servings. Edible marijuana products in solid form shall be easily and permanently scored to identify the individual servings, and we're going to also have our universal symbol imprinted on that edible. If for some reason it cannot be imprinted on the edible, such as popcorn or granola or cookies, we want to make sure that it's on the packaging so that you know what's in the actual product. I will say that as part of the requirements, anything for the edibles, if someone wants to manufacture an edible, they've got to come and get approval from the commission before they're able to market and to manufacture that edible. In one of the other states that already has adult use marijuana, there's up to 2,000 edible products. And so we really want to make sure that we can control how many products are coming into Massachusetts and what those products are. Packaging for the beverages must be packaged solely in a single serving size. Other states have a soda can size where they have multiple servings. And then one of the questions that we had during our debate was, or our discussion, you can't kick the politician out of the girl, I guess, was when's the last time you opened up the soda, took a sip of it, left it, and came back later? We don't want people inadvertently consuming more than one serving without knowing it. So everything is going to have to be individually packaged. Each edible nip contained in the multiple serving package shall be marked, stamped with the universal symbol that's easily recognizable that we have issued, which is the triangle, and it indicates a single serving. The serving size, which I think one of the most important things that we have to talk about, and one of the biggest questions we have, that each serving size in Massachusetts will have 5 milligrams of THC. Now, some people will tell us that's too low. They want higher levels of THC. Some people will tell us that because the law says up to 10, we should have done 10. The reality, and my argument for this, is that while there are many people that, again, Commissioner Doyle has said, has been participating in the illicit market, we have a population of people that have never done this before, and that are going to try this. And this is a reasonable size, milligram size for edibles. If we talk to other states, some of our counterparts in the states that already have legalized marijuana, they will tell you they wish they had started here, and they didn't start as high as they did. So taking their lead, we decided on the 5 milligrams per edible. Training requirements. So we want to make sure that our employees are very well trained. When you go into an establishment, the bartender or the person working behind the counter has got to have an education about this. And we want to make sure that while the training is mandatory for all staff, it's also very seamless and it's also very consistent across the board. So they must have 8 hours of training a year. 2 hours must be in the responsible vendor training. Responsible vendor training programs will be registered with the commission and will not commonly own with another marijuana establishment. We want to make sure that they're training people and don't have any conflicts of interest. And the responsible vendor training program must include the core curriculum set forth by the commission. These are the curriculum requirements. Again, as a public health person, effects on the human body, diversion prevention, compliance with all the tracking requirements, acceptable forms of identification, how to check the ID, spotting fake IDs, and that. Other key state laws and rules affecting the owners, managers, employees, waste disposal, local and state licensing and enforcement, health and safety standards, permitted hours of sale, privacy issues, prohibited purchases and practices. They need to know this stuff inside and out. We want to make sure that they are very knowledgeable, that they understand the law, and that they will fully comply with the law. And then other areas of training determined by the commission to be included in the responsible vendor program. Inspections. You know, we talk about a regulated industry. Inspections is a big part of this. There will be regularly scheduled and unscheduled inspections to ensure that each facility is living up to the standard that we've set. The secret shopper program, same thing as we did for tobacco. You send the kid in, you try to get them to buy something. Hopefully they won't be able to obtain it. And the cooperation from cities and towns. We really want to work with you. A lot of boards of health have said, can we work in conjunction with you and not have the state just walk in and do this on their own? You know your communities better than we do. You understand what happens better than we do. And so we want to make sure that we're a partner with cities and towns. The enforcement, cease and desist, limitation of sales, quarantine, suspension, revocation, and fines. We'll give you a chance if something happens to try to redeem yourself, but there's going to be a time when, you know, people may actually be fined or have other sanctions put against them. So our leadership rating criteria, this was a suggestion that came is that people want to be good business owners. They want to be good partners in our community. I've often suggested to businesses they partner with the chamber. They be part of the chamber and learn about other businesses in your communities. And so we have a number of leadership rating criteria. One, social justice. Many of you know that social justice was a big part of this. In those 29 cities and towns that we've identified as disproportionately affected, that are getting some priority when it comes to establishments, 6 are college towns. So from my perspective, it's important for someone to be a social justice leader and to understand the community that they're in. So 1% of the marijuana establishment's gross revenue will be donated to the Technical Assistance Fund, and the licensee has conducted 50 hours of educational seminars targeted to residents of areas of disproportionate impact in one or more of the following: the cultivation, product manufacturing, retailing, or business training. People are really excited that they'll be able to attain these rating criteria when they go to renew their licenses. The local employment leader. One of the, as a legislator, one of the biggest things I heard day in and day out, especially because I was the chair of the Mental Health and Substance Abuse Committee, was that people from Massachusetts were negatively affected by the drug laws. And people from Massachusetts have been hurt by this, and communities in Massachusetts that have been hurt by this. So we want to make sure that people from Massachusetts are not only opening businesses, but they're working for these establishments. It's very easy for places like here to get people from out of state. It's very easy for people from other states to come in and work. You know, where I live close to Worcester, Rhode Island is a 45-minute drive, not that far. New Hampshire is a 35-minute drive, not that far. So we want to make sure that if you're hiring people from Massachusetts, if you're employing people that have lived here and have a stake in their community and care about their community, then you'll be able to become a local employment leader. A compliance leader. All licensed employees have completed their training requirements for their position within 90 days of hire. They have not been issued a written deficiency statement. They have not been subject to cease and desist orders. They have not had a license suspended, and they met all the timelines. Basically, we want them to be great employers and great business owners. And when you walk into a business, how many of you look at to see if they're, got great ratings from the Better Business Bureau, or if they're part of your chamber, or if they're part of any kind of an association? This is sort of the equivalent here in Massachusetts. As Commissioner Doyle said, we have the Global Warming Act of 2050. We want to make sure that we get to that level, that we reduce our energy and our carbon footprint. The energy and environmental leader, this is going to be difficult to attain. I will tell you right now, some of the conditions we put on the energy standards, which we've had complaints about from the industry, if you can attain this, then you're doing a really, really good job. Because what we've been hearing is that with the energy requirements we allow, the product could be different. You're not going to get the same kind of product if you don't have the light intensity at a higher range than what we're allowing. So this, we think, is going to be really a a good business owner that could attain the energy and environmental leader. They've met or exceeded the energy and environmental impact goals. They've consistently documented and complied with the best management practices for energy use, waste disposal, and environmental impact. They've documented the renewable energy credits representing 100% of the licensee's energy usage that have been retired, and that they've labeled all their products as being produced using 100% renewable energy. We are very fluid as an agency. I think we've had two new offices in 7 months. We're getting another office in a year in Worcester, so it's easy to get to us by email. You can also follow us on Twitter, and our new website is masscannabiscontrol.com. This is where you'd be able to contact us. You know, we have 5 commissioners. Our staff is growing. David Lakeman is our governmental affairs person. He's here tonight with us. We're happy to answer any questions that you have. We're happy to be able to come out here and have a conversation with you. So if there's no other questions, thank you so much. Yes?
Just wanted to know, could you clarify whether the CCC will be offering training, education training opportunities for a marijuana establishment's employees, or is that something we have to research on?
So we're essentially not doing it ourselves. That's going to be contracted out to, I think, an agency, a business is going to do that. So the CCC itself won't be, but there should be information on our website coming when the technical assistance trainings will happen. Yes.
Question, in respect to the warning labels for products that are restricted on labels or packaging that says contain THC, you know, one that not safe for children, is there a minimum size requirement?
Is there a minimum size requirement for the warning labels?
Yes.
Well, it's going to depend on the packaging. So it's going to have to fit on the packaging label. So depending upon how big or small your package is what it's going to be. We don't determine there's a minimum size at all. But it has to be very visible on the packaging.
Right, okay. Might want to set a minimum because people like to go really small. I think that goes 160.
Right.
So,
It could be in there, and I just didn't see. Yes.
Along the same lines of the previous question, the laws about the size, shape, and color of the actual edible product itself. Some of these laws, you've done a great job on the actual packaging and saying no children, but at the public hearing at Pittsfield, I spoke and said that there should be guidelines of making it not too small and colorful and brightly colored and shaped with gummy bears and things. Since the first time a daycare person or a sitter or a parent lets something out of their control and these kids are eating Tide Pods now.
So in the regulations, it states what it cannot be. It cannot be a person, an animal, a sports equipment, apparel. It can't be anything that a child would eat. The gummies that they eat, like almost the Welch's gummies, those are all spelled out in the regulations.
Thanks, I thought I saw that there in the regulations.
Yep.
I didn't see it on the signs.
Nope, this is just a snapshot of what the regulations are. I assure you, the regulations are 106 pages of riveting reading. If anybody would like to read them, they have all the details of what we have. Yes?
I was in our medical marijuana regulations, zoning for our town, we modified slightly if there was a break-in and the reporting time and things like that. I'm assuming there are regulations for, beyond what was shown for security there, about if there's a break-in or something. I don't know whether...
Yes, those are all the regulations.
If it's treated the same as the medical or differently or whatever.
Yeah, they're very similar to what the medicinal has. Thank you.
Make an assumption, but I noticed that the zoning we talked about in relation to kindergarten through 12th grade without any childcare or schools.
Yeah, so the question is about zoning with regards to K-12, but the question remains, what about daycares and preschools, which Commissioner Doyle, being the municipal expert, can answer for you. Is there just one more question on public health? Yeah.
I have a question about the cultivators. Is there energy restrictions for cultivators? Like
Yes.
per square foot?
This is all Commissioner Doyle, which is awesome.
So disappointing when I am the one getting handed the microphone instead of handing it off to somebody else. Regarding the buffer zones, it is different than medical. Medical marijuana regulations allowed spaces from daycare and other places that children commonly congregated. The statute that the legislation, we're implementing legislation essentially. The legislation limited it to what you saw, public, private schools, K-1 through 12. So you have to talk to your town council city solicitor about what they think is allowed with that legislation in place. And I'm sorry, I forgot what the other question was. Can you repeat it, please?
Okay. So as a cultivator, is there energy restriction?
Yes. So the question was, as a cultivator, are there energy restrictions? And in fact, the cultivators are the ones that are probably the most affected by the energy restrictions. So I strongly encourage you, if you're thinking about being a cultivator, to go look at the specifics in the registration, regulations. But essentially what it is you're required to limit your wattage essentially to 30, an average of 36, oh, I'm going to get the language wrong, watts per square feet, unless you are a very tiny operator, in which case I think you can do 51 watts per square foot, but there are some other very detailed regulations in there, and we will soon be convening the Energy and Environmental Work Group to further work on energy and environmental issues. All of this is very detailed stuff, and as you saw in the first slide, we had a very limited amount of time in which to get all of this done. So we put some baseline regulations in the regulations, but we are going to continue to work on them as we go forward. And with that, we have one more speaker to go, and I don't want to keep everybody up past their bedtime. So could we just very quickly go to the other speaker and then take more questions at the end?
Thank you very much. So thank you to the Cannabis Control Commission members here. And right now, thank you. We'd like to transition to our next guest speaker, Mr. Ray Miares, and he is going to speak to us about host community agreements, the legal documents between the municipality and the CCC. No, I'm sorry. I should probably just let Mr. Miares talk about this. Well, thank you.
Well, while he's setting that up, I just wanted, I also brought reinforcements. One of my colleagues from my law firm, Avery Glass-Free, is here with me to help me answer any questions that I can't answer by myself, which is probably a fair number. Okay, so today we're going to talk about host community agreements. Host community agreements are a subject that is near and dear to my heart. I have been negotiating host community agreements with various kinds of businesses for about 20 or 25 years. The term host community agreement, it used to be that if you Google the term host community agreement in Massachusetts, all of the top hits had to do with our law firm. Sadly, it's not so anymore. The term was first stolen by the Gaming Commission, and now it's been stolen by the Cannabis Control Commission. That's not their fault, it's in their statute.
My apologies.
This is not...
oh my gosh, it's just unresponsive. I'm just going to just restart real quick. I'm so sorry. I'm not sure what happened.
That's fine. If you looked at my second slide, you would see a disclaimer that even though we're in the business of giving legal advice to communities, we're not giving you legal advice today, other than one piece of legal advice, which is you should consult your lawyer. Okay, we've done the second slide, so we can move right along to the third slide.
Well, I'm sorry. It's fine.
So, I'll see if I can remember what the third slide is. What is a host community agreement? A host community agreement is a legal document that is binding on the community and is binding on the business that enters into the host community agreement. It sorts out the obligations of each And in a perfect world, it would become an instrument that is recordable, like a permit, on file with the Registry of Deeds. That's not essential, but it's a fine way to make sure that that we all understand the importance of the obligations that are set forth therein. Okay.
I'm sorry again.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
I think it's making progress.
Okay. I think the next slide says, we'll see how good I am to remember what's in all the slides. I think the next slide sets forth what I consider to be the 5 essential components of a host community agreement. So, number 1 is the provisions that lock down what the establishment is. It is important that we all understand what is the establishment that this is going to pertain to, and what does it look like, what are the key features that are important to the community. Many of you may be familiar with the host community agreement that was entered into by the city of Springfield with the MGM casino there. That agreement sadly lacks one of the key promises that was made by MGM, which was that they were going to have a signature piece of architecture that would become a symbol for the city. That's not in the host community agreement, and guess what? That's not what they got either. They got a more sort of ordinary looking building. So if that had been an important feature of the host community agreement, that promise would be legally enforceable. We want to make sure that the kinds of things that are in your host community agreement will in fact be legally enforceable. Now, the regulatory process is such that some of the features of a facility end up being negotiated as part of the licensing process. So we may get some pushback if you are negotiating a host community agreement, but we can't promise that we're going to do X, because who knows what the Cannabis Control Commission is going to require us to do. Don't let that intimidate you. We think that there are many features that can be pinned down, and those that can't be pinned down entirely can be pinned down at least in a range. So that's the first thing. The second thing is impact mitigations, and we'll talk about that. There's a lot of slides about impact mitigation. In a garden variety host community, you would expect promises to mitigate impacts. There we are. Okay, let's see. That's number 2. We did the disclaimer. Let's go back and make sure I got the definition right. The developer agrees to provide the community with certain benefits and mitigate specified impacts of the project. That's what we expect to find in a host community agreement, and you can see it is a contract. It says so right there. Okay, move on. There we go. There's our 5 pieces. That's where we are right now. As I indicated, the second one is the impact mitigation. Primarily, we're interested in limiting the impacts beyond what the regulations are going to require anyway. So if there are requirements that are going to be in their license anyway, it's generally not necessary to include them again in the host community agreement, although it's always a nice thing to have a provision that says you'll comply with all of the regulatory requirements. Okay, the third part is the one that I'm especially fond of, what I call offsets. And we'll talk about that a little bit better, but the idea here is that we want to make sure that at the end of the day, the community is experiencing a net positive outcome. And that means not just that impacts are mitigated, which just means they're reduced, but that overall the experience is a positive one. And so commitments that are made to offset whatever residual negative impacts are what I call offsets. The fourth component is contingencies. What happens if, and we'll talk about number of scenarios that should be included. And then finally, what are municipal obligations? Those of you who have any experience with contracts know that in order for a contract to be enforceable, both sides have to be promising something. So what is it that the municipality is promising in exchange for what it's getting? Okay, so I guess those two symbols are not permitted in the packaging, but we use them here so that we can keep track of the two types of facilities. The rules are a little bit different for the two. The one that has been up and running for a couple of years, the RMD, or Registered Marijuana Dispensary, is the facility that's for medical use, and the ones that are coming up for licensing this year are the so-called marijuana establishments, which are for adult use, and I agree that we should be using the word adult as much as possible. Okay, so the regulatory process for the two are not the same. In the medical field, you need to have a host community agreement in place in order to submit a siting profile to the Department of Public Health. It is not explicit requirement of their regulations that you have it by any particular time, but usually they are submitted as part of the siting profile. The CCC regulations expect to see the HCA earlier at the time of the application of intent. And as you can see, there are, in my simple summary, there are 5 steps of regulation in both. We left out a few steps along the way in order to fit it into the slide. So those are the 5 most important ones. And there you are. So the key facility features that we would like to make sure are included in the host community agreement. The first being a classification. Is it a cultivator? Is it a retailer? What kind of a facility is it? What size is it going to be? You saw a slide previously that divides things up into tiers. What are its construction characteristics? Is it a greenhouse type design if it's a cultivator? Is it a storefront? What are the characteristics in there? What are the site features that are very important? Is it going to be located in a place that is part of a commercial neighborhood? Is it going to be isolated? Is it going to be away from the road? Things like that. What permitting requirements are going to be necessary for it to go through? We had the question before about cultivation facilities. One of the things that we're running into with communities that we represent is that the zoning doesn't really have a classification for these kinds of facilities, especially the cultivation facilities. And so it would be nice in a host community agreement, for example, to make sure that we're all in agreement that this is or is not going to have to go through a site plan review, or it is or is not going to have to go through a special permit process. Many local zoning bylaws are less than clear on these points. We think it's important for there to be a time frame. If the community is going to get into an agreement with a business, there needs to be a clear understanding of how long it's going to take for that business to be operated. We're going to be looking to get some benefits here. We'd like to make sure that the process moves along. And finally, a time frame for commencement of operations. So those are the kinds of things that we'd like to see in the first part of those community. Any kind of marijuana facility will have physical impacts, will have safety impacts, will have community impacts, have infrastructure impacts. These are some examples of the kinds of impacts that might be addressed in the mitigation part of the host community agreement. I would encourage any municipality who is engaged in negotiations, to spend a good amount of time thinking about those impacts before they start negotiating. Our experience, potential licensees are coming to municipalities with prepackaged host community agreements that have a dollar sign associated with them, and encouraging communities to sign up for that dollar figure early. There's a lot of impacts that maybe don't have a dollar sign associated with it, where they can be better mitigated not by throwing money at it, but by adjusting practices in certain ways. So it's very important to do that. The local governments might be lured by the prospect of collecting an impact fee from licensees, but we'd like to encourage people to consider those impacts. So, the statute says that any impact fee that is collected under a host community agreement cannot be more than 3% of gross sales. It's supposed to be reasonably related to the actual costs that are incurred by the town. This is not supposed to be a moneymaker for the town. It's supposed to just be offsetting costs. And the key is that those costs have to be documented in the public record. So if you have a host community agreement that specifies that your fees are going to be a percent of gross sales, or it's going to be some kind of a flat fee plus a percent of gross sales, even if it's going to have an adjustment for inflation, that's all very good, but that host community agreement is going to be good for 5 years only. And when the time comes to renegotiate at the end of 5 years, you will have had to have documented your costs and your impacts. And if those numbers are in fact making money for the town, you're not going to be able to negotiate a second host community agreement that has similar numbers to it. So in our view, the best practice is for your impact fee to be cost-based. That means, first, any impact that can be mitigated through changes in practices or promises to do certain things, that's great, do that. And then things that can only be offset with an impact fee, those are the ones that you can charge an impact fee for. It might not be as glamorous, it might not be as exciting in the first 5 years, but it will be sustainable. So how do you do that? You take each impact that you've identified, that's an easy one, increase traffic. You think about what you might do to mitigate that. So something like you need a new traffic light, you need a police officer to direct traffic, there's an intersection need to be redesigned, you need a stop sign, whatever it is that you need to mitigate the impact, you identify that, and to the extent that that is something that a municipality typically pays for, like a traffic light or a police officer, you compute the impact according to the cost. Okay? So, that's not the same thing as an offset. An offset, you take the same thing that we just said, the impact of increased traffic, the mitigation is the mitigation, the impact fee is the cost, but at the end of the day, the cost may be covered, but your traffic remains. You're never going to mitigate an impact all the way down to zero. So, that's where offsets come in. Offsets generally are promises that are made that are not directly related to the impact of the facility. They are other things. So what we typically see is things like hiring preferences for local communities, running of educational programs, the agreement to contribute a certain amount to local charities, and at least one agreement that we saw, an R&D, which would ordinarily be tax exempt, agreed to be taxed. So those would be kinds of things that we that we would consider to be an offset. You're not directly mitigating it, but they're resulting in a net positive for the community, which is one of the objectives of the CCC, to make sure that there is a plan for the community to have a net positive. Okay. So contingencies, what happens if that can be both a positive thing and a negative thing. What happens if the enterprise is more successful than anticipated and it needs to grow? How is the impacts going to be adjusted? How are the impact fees perhaps going to be adjusted? What additional mitigations might be necessary? What happens if the enterprise is less successful than anticipated? This is particularly important if your fee is somehow tied to revenue. What's going to happen if it's not producing the fees that you expect? What happens if the enterprise enters into a community agreement with another community and starts splitting its attention between you and somewhere else? If you entered into a host community agreement with a medical establishment which suddenly is transforming itself to an adult use facility, how is that going to change? What happens if the license is suspended or other kinds of penalties happen? Finally, what happens if it closes or relocates to another community? You're left with maybe a building that doesn't have a whole lot of other uses, and so you want to make sure that you have something covered in there. And then finally, the municipal obligations would be, generally speaking, for R&D, there's a requirement that you submit a letter of support to the licensing authority, or at least a letter of non-opposition. So usually that's one of the things that you promise to do in your host community agreement. For marijuana establishments, you have to actually certify that you have entered into a host community agreement, and at a later spot you have to send a zoning letter to the CCC telling that the facility is in compliance with the zoning. So promising to do those things satisfies the requirement for a contract. If it's necessary to provide zoning relief in the form of a special permit, the contract can specify that it only goes into effect if the necessary permits are provided. Sometimes utility promises to extend utilities can be an important feature as well. Marijuana facilities can be, in addition to energy sucks, can also be water sucks. So that's an important thing to be considered, especially in a community that's got limited ability to provide water. Providing community relations assistance, things like assistance with community outreach meeting, educational programming, or coordination of local hiring programs. These are all things that can be offered by the town. So, everybody's got their eye on House Bill 4284. It's got some interesting features, but one that I think is particularly important is that if it passes, it will require that impact fee be put into a special fund. And money can only be used for impact mitigation. So once again, it's important to know that impact fees are not money makers and not supposed to be designed as a financial windfall for the community. And if this passes, it not only won't be a financial windfall for the community, but you will end up with a fund that will have to be used for only very specific purposes. So there you are. If you have any questions, we've gone through the slides about as quickly as we could. But I'm happy to answer questions, and in particular, Ivrea can answer questions.
Just a quick question. Is there once the impact fees collected, is there a limit to what that account can be go up to? Is there a limit, or is it just keep the impact fee is a one-time fee, or is it continue every year? And if so, is there a limit?
Well, the limit is 3% of the sales. So, so that's an annual limit, obviously. And the host community agreement is only good for 5 years, then you have to negotiate. So that's the limit.
I have a question that kind of goes back to the very basics. If you have not passed specific adult marijuana use zoning, and you are in a town, your use is not listed, it's not allowed, and now you have someone who comes forward for a testing facility. I'm just picking one of these uses. You have nothing in your zoning bylaws that deals with testing facilities. Is this a situation where the zoning inspector gets to figure out where this gets put? Or you can say, we don't have that use, come back later. I'm just really, because with the 8 different kinds of marijuana establishments, not everybody has this in their zoning.
No, I'd be surprised if any community has zoning that contemplates all the different kinds of marijuana establishments, unless they've just recently adopted it. So the provision that you're talking about is one that's very common in many zoning bylaws. It says these are all permitted uses, and if you're not on this list, you are prohibited. And that's, many of your communities, for example, don't have an industrial district. And industrial uses are just not permitted anywhere. The state law, however, says you cannot prohibit these facilities unless you were a no community. Keep in mind, you don't have any no communities in Berkshire County. Or if you've gone through a ballot question. So, for retail, that's right. So, I would say that you have to assume that you're going to you have to assume that the building inspector is going to interpret the zoning bylaw to permit that facility somewhere.
Just as a follow-on question, if one of your special sort of zoning inspector enforcers figures out where this new use is going to fit in, and if it turns out that that's by right, you know how that flows, but if it turned out that that's by special permit, and one of your special permit requirements is that it's not going to be injurious to the neighborhood or not cause too much traffic, you know, the usual ones that we all have. Can that be applied?
Yes.
It can be.
So, a special permit process is never a bad idea, but in particular, a special permit process isn't a prohibition. It just means that they have to satisfy the various requirements for a special permit. And the kinds of things, I'm not inviting you to write a special permit process that is so stringent that nobody can pass it, because that would create a different kind of a legal problem. But if it's a normal kind of special permit process that talks about not injurious to the neighborhood and what have you, that's certainly permissible.
Can a host community agreement be denied in case you didn't like the applicant for some reason, even though they're...
So the question is, can a host community agreement be denied? So I would say, and I'm not sure that the CCC will agree with me,
I'm asking
but I would say, my opinion is, yes, it can be denied. If you can't reach a host community agreement, if you are not satisfied that the things that I've suggested need to be in it are in fact being offered, you can't say, sorry, we don't have an agreement. The business will not be able to get licensed as a result of not having the agreement. I would caution any town that they don't want to have a policy like we don't enter into host community agreements, because that's a tantamount to a prohibition. But in any particular instance, you have negotiations are not going well, what's being offered is not acceptable, can't reach an agreement, that is a legitimate reason for the license to be denied.
How would you defend a denial if the applicant offers the 3%, which is the most the community can collect from him under any circumstance?
Well, so the question is, how do you defend a denial of a host community agreement if the applicant is offering 3%? So what I'm telling you is 3% isn't the litmus test here. The litmus test here is have they done all the things that you would expect to find in a host community agreement? If they're offering you 3%, but otherwise saying you can't have any mitigation of impacts, other than we're giving you the money and you have to be satisfied with that, you don't have to be satisfied with that.
What if there is going to be no impact to your town? Can you deal more with the offset part of it and say, okay, I want 1% of the gross sales donated to the volunteer fire department, 1% donated to the library, and another 1% donated to the school? Is
So you're suggesting that can we agree that there will be offsets that are not designed to mitigate impacts, and in fact they can be costs.
right.
They can be dollars. I would say the answer is yes, as long as they are not impact fees in disguise. So in your example, if you say, I want as an offset, I want you to donate 1% of your gross sales to our schools, probably that's okay. If you're saying I wanted 1% donated to our public safety department, maybe not. Maybe
Right,
that's
that's what I'm saying,
I have certainly negotiated host community agreements in other contexts that have annual cash payments to the community to support certain kinds of programs. The fireworks display on the 4th of July. Many are paid for by people who sign host community agreements.
Can you explain how municipalities are dealing with the fact that so much of this business is cash? And when it comes time to collect on the community benefit money, how is that being handled? And maybe the Cannabis Control Commission people can explain what's happening with the financial side of the transactional side of the business with regards to cash and banking and all that.
Delivered in cash, the taxes.
What are you doing about that?
Yes. So that, and the question, just in case anyone didn't hear it, is how are municipalities expected to handle, and how is the commission handling the fact that this is going to be a cash-heavy business? So I can obviously speak for the commission, and then I will gratefully hand off the microphone for recommendations on how municipalities handle it. But with the commission, we do have the power to audit. Number one, and we also, again, have that tracking database that is supposed to be tracking how the plan and how the sales are done. So every sale should be tracked in the database. And there are multiple reasons for that, not the least of which is we want to make sure that the product isn't being diverted. So we want to make sure that the product is being sold to adults that are eligible to buy it. And not being, casually brushed off the table and sold out the back door. So it will be very tracked, and we have the power to audit to make sure that we understand where the money is going and that there isn't any side business that is unauthorized under the law. I will now hand off the microphone for the municipal end of it.
Okay, so there are a number of ways to deal with that information. One way to deal with it is that all that information is going to be a public record, so you can get it from the CCC. Perhaps better would be to have in your host community agreement some mechanism by which they directly report and possibly make a provision for auditing. Look, it's cash. and it's inherently less traceable than other kinds of transactions. But the hope is that you're dealing with somebody who is keeping good records, and if he's not keeping good records, they'll find out, and you'll be able to piggyback off of that.
But how are the communities, maybe I'm quibbling, but how does the town receive that money? In bags?
Probably yes. Seriously. I don't know whether there is going to be a sort of parallel banking program established eventually, but there isn't one now. And so you will be receiving that money in cash. You can write a receipt.
Yeah, we have a proposal from a real estate developer, and they're not a licensed grower, they haven't applied yet, and they're asking us for a letter of non-opposition. It seems like it would be difficult to give that letter without knowing exactly who's going to be growing, who's going to be manufacturing, and the thought is to have different growers or different manufacturers in the same spot. Is that even legal?
Okay, so there is a particular community in Berkshire County that has pending, I think it's still pending, an application by a real estate developer who wants to build a facility, a big building, where various licensees will be able to rent space and do their marijuana thing there. That person, I didn't know this part, they're looking for a letter of non-opposition. I'm not sure why, because if they're not submitting, if they're not trying to get licensed, but if they're looking for a letter for that their various tenants can then submit for their licensing, I would caution about issuing such a letter without knowing who the tenants are and what have you.
Right, so but then if they had tenants, wouldn't each tenant have to come back to the town with their proposal of what they're going to do, and that would be a whole separate proposal?
I think the answer, so the question is, assuming that they issued a approval, a special permit or whatever it is for this big facility, would each individual tenant still have to come and get approval from the town? I believe they would each have to have their own separate letter and their own separate host community agreement. Whether they would have to get any additional permits from the town would require me to know something about your zoning, which I don't. But possibly the answer is yes.
One other question related to that is that can you have growers and manufacturers and a testing facility on the same site? I was reading the regs, and it seemed like the testing facilities had to be on a separate, they couldn't be that close to the growers.
Testing facilities have to be independent. I don't know that the regulations though say they can't rent space next door to a retailer.
Right, correct. So what the regulations do is prevent them from being commonly owned, because you don't necessarily want someone testing themselves because there's a certain conflict of interest there. There's nothing in the regulations, as long as the security requirements, et cetera, are adhered to, that would necessarily prevent a testing facility being in the same complex or the same building. Whether or not they would actually want to be is obviously a different question, but it's not just Berkshire County, just to give people a little bit of comfort. There are large buildings in other areas of the state where the building owner does plan to lease out space in sections to growers, manufacturers, etc. But they still will have to meet these very stringent security requirements. So we'll have to see whether or not they're able to do that. But we're going to require that they meet these requirements before they get up and running.
So each one would then have their own host agreement with the town?
It most likely, yeah. I'm trying to imagine a scenario where they wouldn't, and it's not coming to me. I mean, each applicant needs to have a host community agreement, so I don't see how it would work any other way. I may not be thinking of something, but at the moment, I can't think of how else that would work.
And also just to add, if they're seeking a letter of non-opposition or support, they're most likely an RMP facility, so the regs are a little different, so we just wanted to caveat that.
Okay, okay. This is actually for the previous speaker. I don't mind. In mentioning the uptake of heavy metals and other substances from the ground, and you making a very clear case for why users, recreational or medical, want to pursue a more orthodox source of marijuana. Are you going to be engaged in any kind of state-sponsored advertising to that effect? Talking about...
So fun when I get to hand it to Commissioner Flynn.
Thank God we've only gone to the 8 months and we can do this. So under Chapter 55, Section 51 and 52, there are 2 public awareness campaigns that are mandated, which are supposed to be funded through revenues by the sale of adult use marijuana. Fortunately for us, and I can say this to David because it happened this week, Governor Baker had proposed that we get $2 million for this year to front load a public awareness campaign so that we can begin to educate the public around the law, around usage, around some of the public health concerns. The campaign is not a for or against campaign, it's strictly a public awareness campaign. If any of you have done research on adult use of marijuana, you might know the Good to Know Colorado campaign. It's similar to that, or it's No MJ Nevada, or the one that they have up in California. So right now we are we're in the development stages of a public awareness campaign that we're hoping is going to be released before July 1 when the stores are expected to open. The second public awareness campaign is for drug driving, and that's going to be done by the Executive Office of Public Safety. And so there are very severe issues surrounding drug driving, levels of intoxication, the effects of marijuana. Right now, as many of you know, there's no roadside test that we have here in Massachusetts, short of behavioral tests. Some police officers are being trained on different behaviors of people who may be intoxicated by this. And regardless of that, and I'm not a lawyer at all, but we also have a driving under the influence law already in effect. So it doesn't matter if you're on alcohol, Ambien, marijuana, heroin, you still can come under that law. So the 2 public awareness campaigns will happen in Massachusetts. It's just the timing. Fortunate for us that the governor had given us the $2 million, had both the $2 million. The House and Senate have both approved those in supplemental budgets, and now we're waiting for the governor to sign that. Without that money, without money from DPH, we wouldn't be able to do this early on. And I think one of the major takeaways we took from Colorado was they did it too late. Their campaign came after the stores opened. And quite frankly, many of you are here tonight asking different questions about the law. There's 6.2 million people out there that are asking the same questions about this law, and we want to make sure that they understand what's legal in Massachusetts compared to other states. Yes?
It's actually a question for...
Okay. Does that answer your question about the law?
It does.
Okay.
Should or can post-community agreements deal with changes in ownership?
Well, changes in ownership happen in a lot of different flavors, many of them trigger a new licensing requirement. So if you're talking about a corporation that started off being owned by 3 people and you're now adding a 4th person or something like that, I think you have limited procedures for that sort of thing to add another investor and what have you. if it's a matter of concern to the community to make sure that the owners, for example, are local people or whatever, I think it's a legitimate thing to include in the host community agreement. But if you're talking about selling it from Corporation X to Corporation Y, that really involves having a whole new license and a whole new host community agreement.
I have a question. The application process requires someone who wants to open a marijuana establishment to submit initial information, which includes things for background, name, address, shareholders, people forming the company, so that the background check can be done by the CCC. It also requires that the town, that applicants submit the letter of non-opposition for the host agreement. But it seems backwards to me. It seems that a town cannot enter into a business arrangement with this substance without having the background checks in order to know that they can do business with the applicant.
Why don't you write such rotten regulations? Well, there are ways to negotiate around that. The agreement isn't really going to go into effect unless the license is issued. So if it turns out they fail the background check, then there are ways to deal with it.
So one of the things I probably didn't emphasize enough when I was on the slide is the, application is 3 separate packets that can be done in different order. You don't, unlike the medical process where it was progressive, you had to do one thing, then you went to the next stage, then you went to the next stage. With this, because we knew everybody got kind of rushed into this because of the way the legislation rolled out, we made it flexible. So the applicant can file their background check packet, can file their management and operations profile in whatever order that they want, and an application of intent can be, which is where you require all that municipal information. And just to be clear, because I heard it said a couple times, we are not requiring the actual host community agreement be submitted to us. We are requiring a one-page certification by the applicant and the municipality that it has been executed. Later on this year, in fact this spring, at the end of the springtime meeting season, we're sending out a municipal survey and asking municipalities all sorts of questions and asking that anyone who has executed a host community agreement for adult use to voluntarily submit it for us so that we can put it on our website and people can sort of look and see what some towns have done so that they have an idea. But with regard to the question on the background check packet, it's not necessarily that the host community agreement needs to be done before the background check packet. And you could obviously ask someone to engage, in a voluntary background check submission of information to the town if you wanted to. But as my fellow speaker pointed out, they're not going to be able to get a license if they don't pass that background check. So they're not going to have anything to do in your town if they don't get through that background check. So I know you may not be comfortable negotiating with someone if you don't know their background, but we are going to be doing that on our level. So the license won't be issued unless they pass that background check.
And so, if you decide that you want to do this, sounds like your host community agreement, your negotiations could say, we're not executing this until you pass the background check.
So one other question about the developer, because the specifics of the regs say something about if someone contributes capital to the projects, and I would have been thinking of purchasing of the land at a certain percent, over 10%, for instance. And the background checks are also done on, and I would consider that maybe the developer there's no developer portion written in there, but developers and leasers have an interest in these companies, and can these developers and leasers be on the boards? And if they are, then they should be subject to the same background checks, but I didn't find anything about that. The leasers or the developers being part of the check system.
So again, we're talking we're talking about a situation where,
Well, we're trying to say
a person, a developer is proposing to develop a building that's going, that is then going to be leased to potential licensees. And the question, I think, is does that person, because they're the landlord, they own the land and they own the building, are they subject to background check under your regulations? What do you think?
I can tell you, I'm almost positive that there's nothing in there, as you say, that says the owner of the property or the landlord has to be background checked, unless they are also in one of those other roles that does require a background check. And the simple reason for that is that at one point in the early part of the medical marijuana program, there was an attempt, I think, to background check landlords, and landlords were extremely, let me underline, extremely offended by that. They did not appreciate any implication that just because they were leasing space to a business that they should be background checked. So unless they are choosing to become involved with the company from the commission level, we are not requiring that they be background checked.
Okay, right here in the front.
All right, community host agreements. Under the open meeting law, are they negotiated in executive session?
Generally speaking, if they are being negotiated by someone who is subject to the open meeting law, so a quorum of a public body, then that's going to have to be done in open session, yes.
It would have to be done in open session.
In open session, yes. If you don't like that result, then the person who is given the authority to negotiate should not be the quorum of a public body. So negotiated by the town administrator, it's negotiated by town council, somebody who by themselves are not subject to the open meeting law. But I would generally recommend that the board of selectmen, for example, not be assigned responsibility for negotiating it, because that will have to be done in open session, and that's going to create some problems.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well,
okay, go ahead.
Well, there's some other people. Over there, there's an individual.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. Suppose an applicant gets a special permit from a municipality to open an establishment. Is there any issue with beginning construction on that prior to getting the license from the CCC? Not opening the business, not having marijuana plants, but just starting the building construction?
I would say there is generally not an issue. There are lots of examples of facilities that get local permitting, zoning permits, and start to build while they're getting, their alcohol license or their barber license or whatever else. So those things are independent. I don't think you're going to require prohibit people from investing money in anticipation of getting their license.
No, well, I didn't hear the full question.
Well, the full question was if a potential licensee gets their local permits and wants to start building their facility, but they don't yet have their license, can't operate without a license. But I wouldn't be surprised to discover there was anything in your regulations that prohibit them from actually constructing something.
So prepare to be surprised.
Okay.
So it's not that it prohibits it. It's, and this is a common issue for those of you in land use. You're assuming the risk of going forward. There is an architectural review requirement in the regulations that means that you need to submit your plans to us so that we can make sure they're compliant with our regulations. If you go forward and build in advance of that architectural review, which happens after the provisional license is issued, then you may have to bear the cost of tearing something down and putting it in another place, or something similar to that.
Okay, in the back.
As a cultivator, do I have to have every batch
Definitely not my question.
So the question was, if you couldn't hear it, as a cultivator, do they have to have every batch tested? The simple answer is yes, but it's not quite that simple. I would strongly encourage anyone who is interested in becoming a cultivator or a product manufacturer, or even a retailer, to go look at the Department of Public Health testing protocols, because that actually lays out for you exactly what is required. They're posted on the medical marijuana website for DPH. If you can't find them, let me know, and I will email them to you myself. But it's not something that I can easily explain quickly, and I don't want to do a disservice by mischaracterizing something that's a little complicated.
Okay, Stuart, you're such a good citizen.
My second question,
Yeah.
okay. My second question is fairly simple, all right? A letter of non-opposition or approval. Is it required for both recreational and medical?
Well, the letter that you're referring to is in the medical.
Is in the medical side.
Right. What is required at the adult use side of the CCC is a host community.
Is a host community.
Right.
Okay. So if you have an applicant that's applying for both, okay, they need both.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good question. One, I want to commend the commission. I think you guys are doing a great job. This is a very complicated thing, but my question is the municipality side. So,
We're trying to do a good job too.
you are doing a good job. I feel it's pretty clear, but there's gray areas anyway. Does the commission have any information concerning how municipalities should handle mixed-use applicants? For example, a general store that provides off-premises alcohol sales, package store, is looking to do off-premise finished product, adult use marijuana only, and they're already existing establishment. I think our municipality is struggling with that. Could you shed some light on that subject?
So at the moment, that's not possible. There is no mixed use that would allow that to happen. You're going to, if you want to sell at retail marijuana products, which is a legally defined term, you are going to have to be a marijuana retailer. You're not going to be able to be a 7-Eleven with a sort of pass-through adult section. It's going to have to be a marijuana retailer. Whether that's different 10, 20 years down the road, we'll see, but right now, we're starting off low and slow.
Okay, just on that note, so, but, if we have a restaurant in one part of our building, a package store in another part of our building, and then a third with their own separate entrances and exits not passable by the consumer, then you can, that third part of that dwelling, let's say it's a complex, let's call it that for lack of a better word, so that's
So, yeah, it would have to comply with all our regulations, security, whatnot. Yeah, and, one of the things I know when I was the general counsel for the medical program that got looked at carefully when there was shared space is sometimes there are common utility rooms and things like that, so you want to make sure that.
See, I heard and actually spoke to someone at the commission on several different occasions about this. They said that you could, it was not visible by the public, and that there was a separate register, and that it was accessible only by ages of 21 or older, that you actually can do mixed use, and I may have been misled by that.
Yeah, no.
It's like a separate room in the package store.
No, that's a misunderstanding. So it's an entirely separate, maybe within the same larger building, but it's going to have to be an entirely separate entrance, and there's probably going to have to be security on any access points that may be accessible by other tenants, so that you don't have your fellow tenant who's running a restaurant able to sneak through your back door into your limited access there.
Well, so is there anything written on that yet? Is what I'm curious about. So this gentleman behind us asked the question that they wanted to have 3 marijuana facilities, for example, like on top of each other in a big complex development. So wouldn't there be nothing stopping someone from having a separate entrance and exit in a complex that is, as long as you
So, yes, that's what I was saying before. It is possible, but it's difficult, to be really clear. So if you are proposing to do that kind of thing, you really want to be careful, because it's not easy to do in compliance with the security regulations. They're very comprehensive, and you really want to make sure that you understand fully the security regulations and how they're applied, which I'm certainly not qualified to give that.
Just to add a little bit of color to that answer, if you're looking to be licensed as a retail facility, you're going to rent space from a landlord who's renting out retail space. You know, the building might look like a whole strip of stores, you know, fronting on Main Street. The first store is a 7-Eleven, and the next store is a post office, and the third store is a marijuana facility. Now, if you are the landlord of that, and you're running a liquor store in the second space, and you want to now run a different business, a marijuana business, next door in a different space, I think that's probably okay, but we're going to have license requirements are going to be such that your marijuana facility meets all of the standards, and you can't
But you guys already need it, that's why I wanted to do it in the package store.
Yeah. So right now, that's not permitted. It's not permitted under your alcohol licenses. It's not permitted under your marijuana licenses. It's not permitted now. Whether it becomes permitted.
That's what I wanted to clear up.
Yes, the 3% sales tax, is that only on the retailer? What about the grower?
So the 3% sales tax, that's different from the impact fee. The 3% sales tax is on retail.
But not the grower at all?
That's correct.
Nothing on the wholesale. So if you only got grower in your town, you're not getting any tax on that, right?
That's correct.
If we just take a couple more questions, if that's all right, we've got right to shut up.
Okay. Yes.
What are the expectations of the IRS on the cash, part of the cash moving money?
I don't know what the IRS expects.
The IRS essentially, just to let you know, doesn't allow marijuana businesses to deduct their normal business expenses like any other kind of business does. It's a provision called 280E. Other than that, I have no idea what the IRS expects. We haven't heard anything from them in the years that I was general counsel for medical marijuana. We didn't hear anything from them. The only thing I can tell you is the Department of Revenue in Massachusetts treats medical marijuana as tax-free like any other medicine, and will, tax in compliance with the law adult use sales, and they're working very hard to get ready for adult use sales to begin and to be able to collect taxes in an appropriate manner.
Well, that's because it's legal in the state. Right. You still have to report are you unaware of what the IRS regulation is, or the IRS doesn't have a regulation?
I believe they collect taxes from those businesses like any other business.
So it has to be reported.
Right.
Yeah, if you've seen a lot of gangster movies, you know that they usually get you for tax evasion. So the point is, even your ill-gotten gains, your illegal activity, if you're making money off of it, you have to pay taxes on it. So the fact that the feds think of this as an illegal activity doesn't mean that it's exempt from taxation.
I have two quick questions. Okay, just one is very elementary, and then maybe it's saying it's too elementary, but I gotta ask it.
There is no question that it's too elementary.
Okay, so cultivation or processing, this is not considered agriculture.
That's correct.
In the state. Definitely not agriculture. So
will not be in our ag-res zone area.
I can't say that. So, it depends on how you've defined agriculture in your zoning bylaw.
Well, if agriculture is permitted by right in residential zoning, this is not agriculture.
Okay, that depends. If your definition of agriculture is references Chapter 48, Section 3, the definition that's in the zoning act, then this is not, then cultivation is not included. But many towns have a definition of agriculture that is completely independent of the state law, or they have two categories: agriculture that is protected under 48 Section 3, and agriculture that is not protected under 48 Section 3. And so it depends on what's in your zoning bylaw. If your zoning bylaw defines agriculture by reference to the state statute, then cultivation is not included.
That's not clear to me, so I guess I'll have to follow up on that. So it's all indoor, right? It's all covered in snow.
Doesn't have to be anything.
Okay. Well, okay, so my other question is more of a comment than a question. But as a town official, watching where our money goes, I can see this is going to be really good for the lawyers. And it's going to run into a lot of...
And that's bad because...
That's bad because as a town official, we have legal bills to pay. It's very small towns that have very small budgets. Are going to be on the hook for like a lot of legal expenses occurred. Is there any provision in the state, this is maybe out here with us, for remediation of the fact that towns are going to be really challenged in some instances?
Well, let me say two things about that.
Expenses that they are not prepared to handle.
Let me say two things about that. Never go into a negotiation outgunned. So if the first thing that you need to do in your negotiation is to say, give me X thousand dollars to pay our lawyers to negotiate with you, then do it. You can certainly do that. And the second thing is, if you believe that the existence of this facility is going to cause the town extra legal fees, that's an impact. And you can document it under the host community agreement and require that to be included in the impact fee.
But if the potential business denies paying legal fees in advance for a town that may need to use those may incur legal expenses, that's kind of like a...
Not a recommended strategy for somebody who's trying to reach a host community agreement to start off by saying, gee, we're not going to give you any money, you're going to have to negotiate with us empty-handed. If they do that, that's a pretty good signal that that's maybe not an entity that you want to do business with.
Well, that's the way it looks to me, but I'm not sure. I'm just thinking, wow, this is going to cost us communities, they're very small, potentially, big bucks that they don't have right now.
And that's why we start off by saying we need legal help in order to negotiate a host community agreement. You give us X thousands of dollars so we can hire a lawyer to deal with you. And keep in mind, we're going to include legal impacts as one of the impacts of your facility in the host community.
And that happens.
Yes, there's a few RMDHCAs right now, or a few host community agreements with RMDs that do include legal fees. So it's documented and understood that these are common impacts of these facilities.
Okay, can I go back to the question of because my understanding, this has to do liquor stores and marijuana. You said that that's not true, okay? My understanding that the Liquor Store Owners, Inc., okay, of Massachusetts, has approached, because they want to get in on this bid. No? Have they approached the CCC at all about amending the law so that they can sell both recreational and or medical marijuana out of the same facility? You said it wasn't possible.
Now,
Right.
Well, right now, under the law, it's not possible, but they would have to go to the legislature, so we can't change the law.
Right.
We're strictly regulators.
Okay.
So my friends in the legislature, if they want to change chapter 55, which I highly doubt is going to come soon,
Right.
because it's so new, the alcohol industry may have asked them to do it, but not us.
No, it's okay. And my point is that unlike probably most people, and I shouldn't speak for other people, I actually read the regulation, okay? And I really have a hard time figuring out where it says that you can't do that.
Well, there is a provision that actually says you
Yeah.
can't sell alcohol.
On the
If
same
you're
premises
selling
premises of
I
marijuana.
think it says, it doesn't really say that?
Yeah.
Really?
Really?
I mean, I have to go back and read it again?
Yep, you can Google alcohol. You can Google the word alcohol and it'll come up every time it's in a phrase, but
Well, I just kept on saying, I know it's in there where you can't mix the two substances together, okay? But I didn't know it specifically said. I won't.
it can't be sold on the same premises as alcohol.
Right, I'll read it. Thank you.
Just to say, it's been Googled, I have the document, all 106 pages, did the search term, like my colleague said, we're both from Berkshire. There's just the 20% of liquor establishments, you can't have an alcoholic beverage that has THC parties in it, and one other thing, there's nowhere does it say that you can't have under the
that
same.
sounds like it's the law though, because the 20% doesn't appear in our regulations.
Okay. So like being that it's under 935 CR?
It's in the law.
It's in the law. That's in the law.
Not in the regulations.
The 20% is in the law. What we say is that if you're gonna, well, the law says if you're gonna go over 20%, you gotta take the vote.
Okay, so I'm told that we need to wrap up, so consider it wrapped. If anybody has any questions that weren't answered, we're happy to hang around for a few minutes and speak to you individually. Thank you very much.